Hello and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today we're talking about a topic that I feel is inevitable in life, which is navigating big changes. And maybe like as some examples that I can mention, like having a baby or a new career or having to relocate for a career, marriage, moving to a new country. Can you maybe talk a bit more about how these things can affect us and what are things that we can learn about ourselves as we go through big changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, change is inevitable. And change is something as a species we tend to be a little bit resistant to. So if we focus on how to navigate change and get comfortable feeling uncomfortable, then we can make quantum leaps in our evolution, and we're less likely to freeze ourselves in old patterns or glass ceilings because of our conscious or subconscious fear of change. Because change, even good change, positive change, amazing change, can be very destabilizing to our nervous system. And we want to be compassionate to ourselves when we're making changes. So if we use some of the concepts we've gone through in this podcast, one of the things we'd want to look at is the change I'm making authentically aligned for me? Or am I making a change because I think I should? So sometimes we're uncomfortable because we're growing and expanding. And sometimes we're uncomfortable because our body is telling us, you do not want to be a partner at this law firm. You hate this job. Why are you doing this? You wanted to be a sculptor. You do not want to move to Boston. You hate the weather there and you don't want to be a lawyer anymore. So that's why we want to look at, there is the distinction between, is this change authentically aligned for me? Or am I making a change that's violating my own boundaries and in conflict with my authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values? But let's put that aside. Let's suppose that we have assessed that whatever change we're making is really in our highest good and we're going to enjoy it. Even then, change itself requires some discomfort. And one of the examples I use, I don't know if any of you have plants, but if you have a plant that's outgrowing its pot and you move it into a new large pot that's filled with fresh organic soil, it has fresh worm casings, it's like the perfect spot in your house, you put that plant in its new pot and it goes into shock. And I'm always crossing my fingers going, you can do it, buddy, you got this. So even if it's like a magnificent move, it can be a little shocking. Like when I left Canada and moved to America to marry my husband, I mean, I loved my life in Canada. I had an amazing support network. I loved where I lived on a beautiful acreage, and where I was coming was amazing. So it was like a positive change that was authentically aligned for me. But before I left, I made a conscious choice to grieve what I was leaving behind, even though what I was heading to was my most delicious, delightful, fantastic, authentically aligned dream life. I still grieved what I was leaving behind. And I took time. Or when people are getting married, I'm like, I would like you to grieve your single life. Or if you're moving from Boston to New York for work and that job is authentically aligned for you, you want to take that time to grieve your life in Boston. And that can help us sort of not stagnate those emotional beach balls we talked about on our emotional episodes. We're not going to beach ball those emotions. And another metaphor that we can call up from our previous episodes about parts work is that you want to talk to all of your parts. During big change, navigating change is an excellent time to do parts work or internal family systems, because you might have part of you that's like, yes, I want to move to America. and marry my soulmate and live in the tropical climate of the South and, expand my career to reach more men and this, but part of you might be like, I'm terrified. I don't want to do that. What if I fail? I'm not good enough. What if so this is where the internal conflict of our different characters can also play up. And when it's extra important that we double down on our self-compassion, on our self-care, and support ourselves to go through that expansion. Another metaphor that I've often used that I'm going to use again, because I like it and think it works, is that if I'm going to the gym and I want to get a bigger bicep muscle, I'm going to lift that weight. It's going to get really uncomfortable. And I'm going to make that discomfort mean that I'm growing and expanding, and I'm going to be compassionate to myself. I'm going to cheer myself on, and I'm going to drink some extra fluids. I'm going to get some extra rest. I'm not going to, I'm not going to crush an abs workout 2 days in a row. I'm going to crush it. I'm going to go this early. It's really uncomfortable. I'm going to cheer myself on, and then I'm going to rest for a couple of days. So it's important that we're managing our sleep and our nutrition, because when we get stressed through change is when we tend to default to some of our suboptimal programming in the vehicle of consciousness, because we don't know how to deal with that discomfort. So then we might stay up late worrying. So we want to manage our mind and train our brain. And we might start eating less than optimal, suboptimal, low octane fuel to make ourselves feel better. So then while your body and your nervous system and your brain and all of your parts are trying to navigate the change and expansion, we're depleting their units of energy. If you refer back to our episode on units of energy, we're depleting their units of energy, which means the discomfort from the change is going to last longer. And we're more likely to fall into worry and depression and anxiety and arguing or whatever our default mechanism is when we're stressed.
How can men know when it comes to that change, especially if it's a change that they have the power to make decision about? How can they know if that change is in alignment with their authentic self or not?
That is a great question. And I wish that I could just give people an answer to that. This is something I'm working on continuously with my one-to-one clients or my group clients, especially once I get to know them and I can help them navigate that a little bit better. But we do a lot of self-inquiry, and we look at things like, is this going to be fun? Now, is it going to be stressful? Maybe, but why am I doing it? So you can ask yourself, why am I doing it? Am I doing it because it's fun? Because it's going to make me have more time with my family? Because it's going to this or that? Why? What is my why? And if you're doing it because you should take the next level in your company, I'm working with a C-suite executive right now for a major tech company who came to me to navigate his stress management as he transitions into the CEO role. And the first thing I said was, well, and why do you want to be the CEO? What's going to be great about that? And he was like, well, everybody expects me to. It's the next step. And I was like, and why do you want to do that? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, are you going to enjoy being the CEO? And he was like, I never really thought about it. It's just, who would turn that down? But it means he has to move. It means he's going to go from 50-hour weeks to probably 60-hour weeks. He's going to have less time with his family. He's going to be spending less time in the roles he prefers and more time doing tasks he actually does not prefer. So asking yourself, why am I doing it? And asking yourself, is it fun? And maybe doing a little bit of compassionate inquiry with myself or another coach or a therapist or somebody, just doing a little bit of parts work and just letting all of those parts, again, be heard. Well, it would be scary. I don't want to. I like it where I live now. What about this? What about that? And just sort of observe, the same as if you were a CEO and you were making a big change in the company, and you got the C-suite team together and said, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. What do you think? You're going to have one who goes, I think it's a great idea. You're going to have one that goes, I think it's a terrible idea. And one that goes, I don't really know. I need more questions answered. To one that's like, this is stupid. So you want to listen to your internal dialogue so that you can address those parts. And I think by asking yourself what your why is, listening to all the different parts of you with compassion. Now, it doesn't mean that you're still not going to make a decision, right? If you're the CEO of a company and you're like, okay, I want to hear everybody's opinion, and you hear their opinion and you validate them, we want to validate our parts, you can still choose to make a different direction, even if they're not all on board. But if you address each part of you, if you address each part and say, I understand you, I hear you, because we don't want to bulldoze our parts into making a change. Otherwise, we're in internal conflict, and it's going to feel like 5 steps forward, 3 steps back. And that's when we start self-sabotaging and things like that, is when, the members of our internal team are kind of at a, like, jumping across the boardroom, wanting to punch each other, kind of scenario. So yeah, I guess the simple answer would be, ask yourself why you're doing it. What is the change? And then when you're asking yourself, it's okay if it's scary. In fact, if I'm not making changes that frighten me, I like up-leveling. I like making choices that frighten me. I like pushing out of my comfort zone. And again, that's it's a fine but important line between that and forcing ourselves to do something that we should do that may not be authentically aligned for us. And then, so really tuning into that emotional navigation system and saying, is this something that's going to charge my heart battery? Like, okay, maybe let's look at, like, I'm going to have a change of maybe having a child. So you'd want to ask yourself, why do I want to have a child? Do I want to have a child, or does my wife want to have a child and I don't want to? If I don't want to, is it because I think I'm going to be a bad dad, because I'm afraid I'm going to be at work too much? Is it because I'm afraid that it's going to be too expensive? Like, it's just sort of doing this self-inquiry. And in a relationship, you want to be communicating all of these parts with your partner. So part of you might feel, yeah, let's do it, it'll be fun. And part of you might think, that's 20 years of constant work. I don't know. Part of you might think, what if I'm a terrible father? Part of you might think, you know what? It just doesn't interest me. And then a part of you might be ashamed that a part of you doesn't want to be a father because you think you're supposed to be and everybody expects you to be. So I guess another piece of advice is be brutally honest with yourself without judgment. That help?
With this, I also have a follow-up question, because I like that you said that at the end of the day, even with all the parts having their input into making a decision, you're the one that's making a decision. Is there, like, the question would be like, what makes the parts to overpower the decision, where parts input might be so strong that you end up making decision from parts, or like let's say fear, or
like a subconscious takeover. So this is what's happening to most people most of the time, to be honest. Because they're not aware of their inner dialogue. Or again, if we refer back to our parts work episodes, it's because they're not even aware of that part, because their self-concept is I'm a tough guy who loves being a lawyer, and my dad was a lawyer, my dad's dad was a lawyer, and I love being a lawyer, and I'm a really strong guy. He might have a part of him that's like, I want to be an artist, and part of him that's like, it's terrifying. I feel so like, I think this is so hard, and everyone's so mean, and I'm scared, and what if I fail? But he might not be aware of those parts. So if you find yourself behaving in ways that surprise you, or you continuously feel internal conflict, those can be excellent KPIs that one of your parts is in resistance, and it's inviting us to do a little bit of internal work. Because yes, if we have all these different parts of our personality, because we all have parts of our personality, we're multidimensional beings. It's like, again, for those that haven't heard that episode, think of a time that you've had to make a big decision. Part of you feels one way and part of you feels another way. Or my example of like, maybe part of you wants to have a child, but part of you wants freedom and part of you wants this. And so it's looking at all of those different parts, listening to them, giving them a seat at the table of your consciousness and addressing each one individually means that you're not going to have a hostile takeover from the subconscious. Because if you don't give them a chance to hold the talking stick and sort of be heard, what happens is they do that hostile takeover and they take over your personality. This is what happens with self-sabotage, or people that are afraid of change. The part of them that's like, oh no, buddy, I'm keeping you small. I'm keeping you safe. I'm keeping you, like, we might have protector personalities, or parts of us that are like, oh, it's not possible for you to make more than 5 million a year. That's your upper limit. Plus, people that are rich are selfish and greedy and whatever. So again, it's this subconscious internal programming that we want to use our metacognition to be aware of and presence it so that we can question it. Doesn't mean we want to invalidate it. So I had a part of me that was terrified to leave Canada and terrified to come to America, even though I was like, this is the first time I've been married in my life. I always said I would never get married unless it was a full body F yes for me. I didn't need to be married to fill my self-concept. So even though I knew it was there was no question that's what I wanted to do, there was part of me that was terrified it would fail. There was part of me that was terrified to leave Canada, and part of me that was terrified to leave my comfort zone. I had a very beautiful, comfortable, amazing life where I was. So if I just ignored all of those parts and leapt into it, what it then feels like is a sort of internal pull. And that's when we kind of get more addicted or more stressed, or we ruminate a lot, or we get a little sabotagey. So because I do this for a living, I took time to presence all those different parts and ask them, like, hey, what makes you feel unsafe? Well, this makes me feel unsafe. That makes me feel unsafe. And I just listened to all those parts and I said, that's fair. I got you. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to make sure that we're being financially responsible. Here's how we're going to make sure that we're doing this. Here's how we're going to make sure we're doing that. And then also, like, here's what's going to be really fun, guys. Here's what's going to be fun, and here's what's going to be fun, and here's what's going to be fun. And I acknowledge that it's going to be, a change. And it was a lot for my nervous system, even though I was like, let's go. And it was a fun, exciting, gorgeous, romantic adventure. There was still parts of me that were in resistance or in shock. So instead of bulldozing or ignoring those parts, I allowed them to be there. And met them the way I would as a CEO. If you're the CEO of a company or the founder of a company, and your CFO is feeling really like upset about something, or I don't think we should take this risk. I don't think we should take this acquisition, because what if we buy this? What if we acquire this company? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? You're not going to just say to that CFO, shut up. You don't get to speak here. We're doing it. It's not going to be effective in the leadership team, but you can say, yeah, those are really fair concerns. Let me address them one by one. Here's what we're going to do. Now we're going to make this merger, like we're acquiring this company. And here's what we're going to do to make sure that you sort of feel safe, or that you can be skeptical. But if you hear how sound my logic is, you know why we're doing it, you know what's in it for you, you're going to be more likely to be on board, and you're not going to be actively sabotaging or quitting or whatever as you would be if I just completely pretended that you didn't exist. So it's a new way of thinking about ourselves, plural, but it can really prevent a lot of burnout, a lot of annoying behaviors. And yeah, it can help us navigate big changes more effectively by learning those skills. And this is something that I help clients with on a daily basis. I have clients right now, again, I have a client moving into a C-suite team. I have a client who's trying to decide who's a commercial real estate developer in a market that is not great for commercial real estate right now, and he's trying to make some big pivots. I have another one who's changing a very high level career and moving to a new city. I even have a client who's making a decision whether to change the gender they were born with or not. A very high level actual genius. So these are things that are impacting people every day, that when we get good at and when we practice, we can navigate change with less impact on ourselves and our families.
One follow-up question that I wanted to ask about, even like with the clients that you just mentioned, and the example that you mentioned about the client who is going potentially like higher level within his career, how can men navigate this when it comes to change the expectations that they have around them? Like with that example that you talked about earlier, he said that pretty much like everybody is expecting that. That's kind of what should happen. Like to your point about the should, how can they navigate those expectations that either society or maybe even like closest people to them, like family members or their partner, are putting on themselves? And keeping in mind what you said in previous episodes about relationships, keeping your partners or other important people's in your life wants, needs, boundaries, and values in mind as well.
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. And it's hard for me to address that without a little more content or context. And I love delving into this with people. Like I have a client who calls me whenever he's about to acquire a new piece of land for his company, or his company is about to buy a new company. We try to figure out, am I doing this out of authentic alignment or because I'm supposed to, or because of ego? Like one time we figured out, he was like, I wanted to buy this to piss off my competitor. And I'm like, hey, should you spend $50 million to, like, should you? Maybe, like, if you don't care, but it's about self-inquiry. And when you feel like you should do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you should do is against your authentic alignment. So again, that involves revisiting your wants, needs, boundaries, and values, and seeing, is there a way that I can do this and have the things that I want? Or what is it that I want about this? What do I not want about this? And at the end of the day, if you decide that you're doing something to make others happy at your own expense, I guarantee the happiness will not be sustainable, because there is no condition more painful than self-betrayal. And if you are doing something you hate every day, you're not going to make your wife happy, because you're going to come home and you're going to be miserable and depressed and lifeless. And if you have a partner who needs you to do those things to make them happy, then I would suggest some couples coaching or counseling or therapy to figure out what, because your partner might be projecting their unmet needs or their unmet expectations onto you. And yeah, that's hard. There's like, yeah, sometimes I have helped clients, either leave a career or leave a marriage or do things that everybody in their life. I have a client I can think of in Europe who was like, I'm going to leave this job because I hate it. My partner in no way is interested in working on our relationship. We have nothing in common. Our kids are grown. There's so much I want, and I don't really like them that much, but everybody in his family expected very certain things of him. And when he came to that decision, it wasn't easy. But what is also not easy is betraying yourself or doing things to make others happy at your own expense. And that's a hard line. And it might be that, say, for instance, you're a lawyer and you wanted to, and you have your own law firm or your partner, and you make a lot of money and you have a family with 5 kids, and you're like, but I always wanted to be a sculptor, but you have 4 kids that haven't gone through college yet. Your partner works from home, like doesn't work, or is not, I mean, works, but works at home as a homemaker, which is the hardest job on the planet. You know, and you have a party that's like, but I just want to be free and be a sculptor. Maybe you could talk to that part and say, hey, we're going to take weekend pottery classes. And in 5 years, when I have X amount of money saved and I know that we can safely retire, then we will do X, Y, or Z. So you can have this sort of like negotiation with yourself, or find these like other win-win scenarios, or, you know, maybe that part will be on board with the change if you have that conversation and say, hey, I know you don't love this, but we have a lot of people that are benefiting from it. Here's our 5-year exit strategy. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to do pottery on the weekends. And we're going to get involved in art law. Or, you know, I heard that somewhere recently. It was a case study I read. And so there are ways that you also want to find balance, because you don't want to be irresponsible and say, well, sorry, my authentic alignment is that I want to be an artist. So screw all of you. I'm quitting my job and the universe will take me. You know, sometimes that can be an okay strategy. I've definitely helped people just like make a huge jump into something totally different. And we also want to have a balance with responsibility and commitments that we've made. And we don't necessarily need to swing the pendulum from here to be like, okay, this part is alive and now they get to be totally in charge all the time and we're going to do everything they want to do. Because that part might be like a 7-year-old and you still get to be the CEO. So it's about critical thinking, expectation management, and finding win-wins that align with your overall wants, needs, boundaries, and values.
I have a follow-up question also about the grieving that comes with the change. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit more on like, what does it look or feel like? Because I feel like even the grieving, there's like 2 follow-up questions. One is even like for men to get an idea, what does it look like, feel like, what's that experience? But also, how can they navigate that when a lot of times they're expected to be strong within those changes?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. So let me answer it in 2 ways. I think from what I understand, your first question is, how do they navigate that change with grieving? Let's leave the partner or the expectations outside of it.
Pretty much like how to grieve.
Yeah, so that can be really, really challenging for men. And a lot of men really get very resistant when I talk about this with them. And they're like, I'm not doing that. And I'm usually very open and very close with my clients. I'm like, you're doing it. Like, I'm not doing that, Sandy. That sounds very uncomfortable. Or just they're like, that sounds really dumb. But it is so helpful and healing. And you could either, so for grieving, you could either write a letter, like say you're getting married and your single self, you've always been like, you know, we do this on Friday nights. I was the president of my fraternity. I have a client who's like president of his fraternity. He had a lot of freedom. He had money. He flew all over the world whenever he wanted, no responsibility. So then getting married is beautiful and wonderful for him. And just so that part of him doesn't feel like it's dying, like the ego death, or I just said, why don't you just write a letter to that part of you saying, hey, you're really fun. Thank you for being there. I really like that. You know, write down everything you liked about that part of your life and just acknowledge that change instead of just jumping into it and leaving those unhealed things. And he actually said that he had a good cry about it, which he was very surprised. So it might be sitting down, having a good cry. It might be stomping your feet. It might be, and if you don't have an environment that is able to support you in that, I'm sorry, because it is hard. A lot of men don't have that nurturing environment. Go for a drive. Go for a drive, play some music. That's one of the things I did. I created a grieving playlist when I left Canada, like everything that reminded me about things in Canada. And I would just drive around in my Porsche crying. listening to this playlist on Spotify. So, yeah, or just acknowledging it. Even sometimes just mentally, if you're not into the emotional navigation system deeply yet, and you don't feel capable of having a cry, just acknowledging that change and just acknowledging that part of yourself. Just as the same as if you're at work and there's a big change happening and it's really impacting you, don't you sometimes just want to be acknowledged? Like somebody to say, hey, thank you for being on board with this change. I know it means that everything changes for you and your responsibilities are going to be different and you're going to be spending a little more time out of town. And I know you were really comfortable where you were, but here's what's in it for you. And I see you and I acknowledge you. You know, it's that kind of vibe.
And how can they navigate that expectation? One is expectation from others for them to be strong within that change, but also I feel like their self-image that they're supposed to be strong and masculine.
Yeah. Well, I would first propose that I probably have men challenge me on that on a weekly basis, which is valid. I would say that we can redefine what it means to be strong. And I think being strong is being authentic. Authenticity is the number one, I think, goal of this human species. And here's something else, fun fact. The most attractive thing neurochemically to another human being that people are most drawn and attracted to is authenticity. Now, will it sometimes make them uncomfortable on a conscious level? Yes, but on a subconscious level or in an energetic and neurobiochemical level, authenticity is what people actually respond to the most by a landslide. Now, also, though, if you are changing a lot and you used to behave this way, and now you're going to behave a totally different way, we can also validate that change is destabilizing for your family. So even if you are on a good, positive change of self-help and growth and emotional receptivity and vulnerability and authenticity, if you haven't had that conversation with your partner and you just start showing up differently, it's going to destabilize her reality. So, yeah, I think in order to be strong, it's more helpful to acknowledge the parts of us that feel quote unquote weak so that they get on board so that we're less likely to behave in ways that are, quite frankly, suboptimal, weak or inauthentic or kind of our shadowy behaviors.
I have an interesting question on when it comes to navigating change. How can men navigate change that was not their decision? So it can be either they lost somebody or maybe they just have to take this job so that they can do or like take care of their family, or having a baby could be another one, depending on the situation. But how can men navigate changes that it's not necessarily that I make decision and now I step into the change where they're fully in charge of that transition or that process of change happening. But how can they navigate change that it just happens?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, you want to be very self-compassionate and very honest with yourself about what this change means for you and how you can navigate this change while at least having some attention to your wants, needs, boundaries, and values. You can look at how this change impacts others. So if their behavior gets a little crazy or a little destabilized, you can remember that they've just been placed in a new big shiny pot and they're a little bit in shock. So then we have more compassion for others that are involved in the change. Like say, for instance, you and your wife were not planning to have children and birth control failed and she became pregnant, and together the two of you decided, okay, we're having a baby. And now all of a sudden you're like, God, we were supposed to go sailing around the Caribbean next year. And I was going to move. I was going to open another franchise of my business in another country. And this changes everything. Again, you want to find ways that you can meet your needs, but also meet needs of your partner. And this is where the divine masculine really shines, is providing that that oyster shell that allows the pearl to grow, that stability, that structure, that providing that, whether it's providing money or providing emotional safety and security or whatever it is, it's going within and allowing all the parts to be there that actually allows you to be the strength that is the catalyst for a lot of humanity. And I celebrate what the divine masculine brings to the table. And again, in that honesty and vulnerability, there is a type of strength. And the more we address those parts, as we said before, what we resist persists. So if we're not addressing those parts, we're stuffing those emotional beach balls down, it's going to come out in other ways, or it's going to get you down the road. So a lot of self-compassion, really doubling down on your self-care, your nutrition, your sleep, working through things, finding ways that you can meet your needs, finding ways that you can find, if it's something you can't control, finding ways you can make it fun. And finding out what other areas of your life you can balance. And again, coming back to what are your priorities? What are your values?
And also with this, like I wanted you to touch a bit more like the importance of self-compassion within this, and maybe even like describe how would self-compassion look like for men as they navigate changes.
Yeah. So let me use an example of two children. So let's imagine we all have an inner child and they're going through a scary change. And they have so one of them has a father figure who's like, suck it up. You're going to be fine. You have to do this. Everybody needs you. I need you to be strong now. Suck it up. Do it. Don't be weak. Don't show weakness. Don't cry about it. You got this. That kid's probably going to get the whatever it is done. But imagine that the other kid had a father who was like, hey, I really believe in you. This is really scary. It's okay to express emotions about it. You are so smart and you are so capable, and it's totally normal that change feels overwhelming. But I'm here with you. I've got you. Like, I've got your back. Like, I've got you. And I love you. And I'm so proud of you. And it's okay if you make a mistake. And I know you're going to be excellent. And I know you've got this because you are so capable and you are so kind and you are so smart, or whatever it is. So we want to watch how our own internal dialogue goes, because both of those kids might achieve whatever it is or make whatever change, but one of them is going to be happy and securely attached and unfazed, and the other one's going to be white knuckling it through, achieving and succeeding, and it's just which one's more fun. So speak to yourself the way you would speak to your child, a puppy, whatever that thing is that can melt your heart, whether it's like your favorite sports hero or Buddha or Jesus Christ, or your 4-year-old child, or you as a 5-year-old, or your best friend, or your wife, or whatever it is, whoever like brings out the most feeling of warmth and compassion in you. How would you speak to them if they came to you and they were like, bro, I've got this huge change happening. I'm overwhelmed. At least I hope if you're listening to this and you would be the first father, that's okay. Give me a call and we'll sort some of that out for you. It's okay wherever you are. But hopefully there's somebody in your life that you can help connect to that compassion. Or think how you would, as a leader of your company, because a lot of my clients are leaders or entrepreneurs, and how would you speak to a very valued team member that is struggling? And also, because we want to connect to other human beings, the harder we are on ourselves, the more self-critical we are, the more merciless we are on ourselves, the more we expect perfectionism from a shame energy, which we've talked about in previous episodes, the more likely we are to behave like that to other people. And other people aren't going to like us as much because other people remember how you make them feel. So self-compassion and self-care is sacred and important. And again, we can't pour from an empty bucket, right? So we need to fill our bucket. And as we're stepping into that magnetic masculinity, we are energized, we are empowered, we are vulnerable, we are authentic. And that means that is inclusive of all of our parts and all of our experiences without judgment.
Can you also talk a bit more on even like some coping mechanisms that men might, well, not only men, anybody, but we're focusing on men, might create when navigating that change or going through that change that might not be really serving them well, like binge eating or starting to scroll phone too much or stuff like that. And that would be like the first thing. And also like, how can men navigate those emotions that do come up as they go through that change?
Yeah. So we might call the first part of your question numbing out. They're numbing out. They're like, oh, this is stressful. This is scary. I don't know what to do with these emotions. They might start watching more pornography, might start binge eating, might start doom scrolling on the phone, or becoming shut down and more distant from the family. So I know with certain men in my life, when they start shutting down or becoming distant, historically, I don't really have anybody in my close proximity that does that now, because most of them are in their magnetic masculinity. However, there's nothing wrong with anywhere we are. I know that it's a sign that they're struggling and I can reach out to them. But if you don't have other people's capability to do that, if you don't have other people in your life that can recognize your cry for help for what it is, you're going to want to be extra self-aware, extra self-compassionate, and just try to make the best choices you can. Remember, refer back to our energy management, because change requires a lot of energy. So if our change requires 100 units of energy and you only have 20 units of energy, and you're sleeping poorly and eating poorly, it's not about beating yourself up for those things. That makes it worse, because that's dealing with it with the energy that caused it. But it's just more being self-compassionate, saying, oh, I noticed that I'm watching a lot of pornography, I'm binge eating a lot, I'm shutting down, I'm drinking more alcohol. Oh, that means that I'm now aware that I've got some emotions to deal with, or some communication that needs to happen, or some parts work or something. So don't beat yourself up. Treat yourself with compassion and say, oh, I noticed that this old pattern is coming up. I must be feeling unsafe or destabilized right now. So approaching it with compassion. And then you can refer back to lots of our episodes about emotions, just making that choice to let those emotional beach balls out, because what we resist persists, and it's better out than in.
And with this, like how I feel like a lot of times when we make especially like with big decisions, we make decision, we kind of go along with it, but then we start to look back and think on like, oh, what if I made the other decision? What would be the path there? Kind of the story of the grass is greener on the other side. So how can men navigate that?
Well, I think it's normal to always have a part of us that's like, but what if we did that other thing? And if you're making a lot of changes, trying to think that your happiness will be on the other side of that change, I would invite you to see, in what areas of your life can you be happy with now? Because it's much more empowering, I find, to make a change from a place of like, things are awesome. What else can I do? So it's doing the inner work, because, if I get a bigger house, if I take that job, if this, if that, I'll be happy. If this, I'll feel good enough. If that, is just a sign that we're in our conditioned self. It's just a perfect, clear signal that we need to go back and do a little bit more alignment with our wants, needs, boundaries, and values, or just a little self-inquiry. And work on, so we could, there's no wrong way to make a change. we typically, as human beings, make a change because we're all afraid of change, most people. We will make a change when the pain of staying the same gets so big that it outweighs the perceived subconscious perception of the pain of change or the discomfort of growth. That's a very normal way to change. I don't prefer it. I've done that way. I prefer to change from a more of a manifestation energy where I'm like, I love my life. What would it be fun if I had more of? Or would it be fun if I tried to launch a podcast to reach more men? Would it serve my goals? Wouldn't it be fun if this happened? And the more we appreciate what we have, we could lean into a gratitude practice or appreciation practice. The more we appreciate what we have and have clarity on what we really want, the less likely we are to make changes from a place of the grass is always greener, or I'll be happy when. Because I know people that have fancy degrees, millions of dollars, check, 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 every box checked. And again, like we say, we want to bridge that gap between achievement and fulfillment. So are you changing from a place of resistance? Or are you changing from a place of alignment? Are you changing from a place of conditioning? Or are you changing a place from excitement? And again, it's understanding those nuances of, is this discomfort telling me something needs to be looked at and I'm trying to avoid it? Or is this discomfort just the healthy expansion that my bicep muscle is growing?
And also, like, a bit touching on relationship piece here. How can, let's say, if a man has made the decision or they're navigating certain change and they're doing good with it, but their partner might be struggling with that and it might be affecting them. Like, how can they, what can they do in that kind of situation?
You can help them with their parts work. You can listen to them the same as you want to listen to one of your parts. If it's upset or stressed, and if your partner is feeling unsafe or overwhelmed, that is a wonderful time to lean into vulnerability and say, it's okay, I feel scared too, but we've got each other. Or tell me what it is that you're afraid of. Well, what if we move to Boston and I don't have any friends there? Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. Let's strategize some ideas together. But before you start fixing your partner, I have this tendency too, I'm not judging you. Before you try to fix their problems, just presence them and listen to them. Connect before we correct. So just listen and say, yeah, that's perfectly understandable. You feel that way. No matter what they say. Yep. I can only imagine that that would be sad, scary, traumatizing, whatever they say. Tell me more about that. And listen to them. So, and recognize it that, oh, they're going through the discomfort of expansion too, right? It's, is it the discomfort of this is not authentically aligned for me? Or is this the discomfort of this is not authentically aligned for my partner? Or is this the phoenix burning in the ashes so it can rise again? Or is this the butterfly melting in the cocoon so that or the caterpillar melting in the cocoon so that it can become a butterfly? And that kind of inquiry of which discomfort is it is really, really, really important and hard to teach in a 1-hour podcast. But I think the success is just knowing that those are options so that you can use a little bit of self-inquiry. So I think if you are even listening to this, you're nailing it. If you are listening to this podcast, and it's not the shortest podcast, they aren't the shortest episodes. If you're listening to this, you're already 10 steps ahead of the game, because you can at least ask yourself those questions. And even if you don't know the answer right away, the fact that you're asking puts you in a very small percentage of evolutionary leaders that are willing to redefine how we move forward and create a more conscious society.
So this is my follow-up question, but I don't know if we will manage to go too deep into it. But how can men navigate it where for one person the change is in authentic alignment, for the other one it isn't? Or there's that like authentic alignment clash within that change?
You need to find a win-win. Like, for instance, my partner was looking at a job somewhere that would give us, we are very comfortable. It was like, it would be like a lot of money. And it would be in a place that I would not want to live. I need the warmth. I am like a tropical plant. I'm like a tropical orchid. And I did not thrive in the climate I was in Canada. And now that I'm in the South and I'm in the warmth, I'm like, I feel amazing. But if you wanted me to move to like, it's not there, but like backcountry Minnesota or something, that would be a big ask. So if I was to do something like that, it would have to be like, here's the 10 things we're going to do to make sure that your needs are met. We're sending you to Costa Rica for 2 months every winter, and I will travel remote with you. And here's what we will do with the dogs. And here is, we would sit down and address every one of those concerns and make it a win-win for both of us. Or could he make a different decision where, why is he making that decision? What does he want from it? How important is it to him? Well, it'll be really good for my resume. Well, why would that matter? Like, so we would drill into like, is that something that is actually going to make you happy? Or is it something that you think you should do? And if it's something you're doing because you think you should do it, or it might be good on your resume, it's going to require some communication.
And final question that I have here is, can you talk a bit on how change and maybe some triggers that might be coming with that change could be a tool to see things that we might need to address or that could be healed or worked on?
Yeah, change and expansion is a wonderful time for integration and a wonderful time to do the next layer of our work. So whenever we become aware of something, it's like, what weakness is this here to guide me to strengthen? It's not about judging ourselves. It's like, great, we all have stuff to work on or we wouldn't be here on this planet. So, maybe I'm at a level 27 and now I'm looking at these things that aren't working. And now I can go to a level 29 because that was the barrier between where I'm going. So it's framing it with a celebration that, hey, I'm growing and expanding. The same as when you, again, with that bicep muscle, when you go to the gym and you start feeling that discomfort, you go, oh, okay, this means I'm growing. That's good. I'm nailing it. And just sort of, I guess, doubling down on all of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes that people can go back and listen to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so yeah, that's navigating change. Anything you want to add?
No.
And anybody listening, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, there's always a link in show notes that you can do that. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave it in comments as well.
And thank you. We appreciate all of you and we celebrate all of you and whatever you're going through. And thank you for being evolutionary leaders and helping humanity heal out of the emotional dark ages.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Okay, bye for now.